Good afternoon. We are here on October 6th for Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee work session. We have two items on the agenda today, starting with zoning text amendment 2510 native plants. I want to welcome some colleagues who have joined us here. Welcome. And also we have some members of the agricultural community who have joined us as well. And we have DPS here as well, also for the next item on our agenda. Before turning it over to Ms. Nadeau, I'm going to see if committee colleagues have any opening comments. If not, happy to turn it over to the sponsor if you would like to make any opening comments.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to members of the PHP Committee for this work session. The zoning text amendment that we're taking up today is ZTA 2510 landscaping requirements native plants is one of two components for the Native Plant Protection Act, which is a legislative package I introduced earlier this year to expand the use of native plants in our landscaping. And we know that native plants are essential to sustaining our biodiversity, building climate resilient landscapes, and also supporting pollinators. The benefits of native plants also extend to native trees, shrubs, grasses, and helps protect from soil erosion and runoff, and also improves our air quality. And so look forward to this conversation on moving forward with our environmental sustainability goals. And I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you. Look forward to a robust discussion. I think there are a lot of questions that we're going to have to work through today. So let's get into it. Ms. Nadeau, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, committee. So a public hearing was held on July 22nd. There was testimony both in opposition and support. Testimony in support emphasized the ecological importance of native plants for birds, pollinators, and broad ecosystems, and actually requested an increase from 50 to 70%. There was also testimony in opposition, particularly from the ag community, noting that the reduced demand for turf grass would threaten the viability of local sod farms. And then there were requests for amendments, mostly regarding clarity and consistency. We received all of our impact statements. The first was from OLO. Our RESJ impact statement noted minimal impacts because it would benefit all community members proportionally by race and ethnicity. The climate assessment was positive, noting improvements to biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. And then lastly, the planning board recommended support with amendments, which I will get to later. So the ZTA itself, what the ZTA does is require 50% of native species with language in two sections of the code, the open space landscaping plans and then the general landscaping plans, plant materials. It is defined native species as the Mid-Atlantic region. So this includes Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, West Virginia, and DC, and then also prohibits the use of species from the Maryland Invasive Species Council's list. So jumping to page 3, the staff report is sort of divided by broader questions with amendments throughout. So first, as noted, the ZTA as introduced had amendments in two different sections. First is section 638, which talks about open space landscaping, and then separately in section 643, which is about general landscaping. The planning board recommends only putting the language in section 643, which is the general landscaping section. That section already talks about not using invasive species, and also by having the language in 638, it inadvertently affected the requirement in rural open spaces. So to avoid redundant language and not affect the current requirements, council staff agrees with the planning board and recommends an amendment that says at least 50% native species and only putting the language in section, now I'm going to switch them, section 643.
I don't think we're going to take up individual items and vote. I think we're going to go through all the issues through the packet. So let's just keep going through, and then we can circle back and as decision points emerge.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so the first big question here at the top of page 5 is what type of projects will be subject to the ZTA. So ZTA 2510 will be triggered for all species that are planted in one of our 4 types of open space, which is rural, common, public, and amenity open space. What triggers somebody who's applying for anything, having to jump to this section of the code are usually 3 reasons. Either they have to do parking lot landscaping, they have to do screening requirements, or it's a development application. So the parking lot landscaping, screening requirements, those are the type of things you'd see with commercial developments. And then development applications are our conditional uses, our site plans, our expedited approval plans, your large development projects. So what is almost easier to understand is what's not included. So that's projects that are built by right. So if you're just constructing one single family dwelling on a lot, you will not trigger this section of the code, and therefore the ZTA will not apply. Also, it would not be triggered by a private homeowner who's deciding to renovate their property, and also to developments after initial approval of a project, because these are plans that are checked when a development is finished, and then there's no like going back every few years. And then lastly, ZTAs, as always, are not retroactive, so it would not apply to current developments. Usually that it means by application date. So anybody who's already filed an application, this will not apply. So next, I'll pause there. Questions? No? Okay.
Let's see if there are any questions on that. Any questions? So I just want to, what about items that have to go through mandatory referral? How does that work?
Yeah, so mandatory referral, because it's just more of an advisory process, while those do go to the planning board, and of course the county always tries to apply our own laws to ourselves, it is just a recommendation, so would not be as bound. And so that would be MCPS, parks, and county-owned property.
So schools, parks, county-owned property, it could be used as a guideline, but would not be required.
Yes, guideline, that's a great way to describe it.
Okay, and then since it's only for, it doesn't include by right, but does include other processes, things that are approved, let's say through like the quarter ZTA that we did, that would trigger the requirement, but not a single family tear down.
So interestingly, I'm glad you asked this. So ZTA 2502, let me rewind slightly. So in the zoning ordinance, there's a table that says what types of applications trigger the landscaping. And it includes optional method by MPDU and by cluster development. 2502, we did not add that new type of optional method to that table. So this would not apply to 2502 because that's not included in that table, which does make some sense since those are smaller sites.
Okay, so the quarter ZTA would not be included, single family teardowns would not be included. If somebody was building a new subdivision of townhomes, that would be included. A new apartment building would be included.
Yep, that is correct. All of those were correct, yes.
Okay. Any other questions on this item? What is included? Okay, let's continue.
So there are different types of open space. The trend has been mostly we've been talking about common open space, but there are different types. If you go to the table on the top of page 6, so that shows you the different types of development plans, and then based on the zone, I guess the way to read this table is you have the zones on the left, the types of open space across the top. So for example, in the RNC zone, rural open space will always be required for every type of development. But in the GR, NR, and employment zones, common open space would only be required for a townhouse building type. So you look at 3 different things to determine if you proceed through this division of the zoning ordinance.
Vice President Joanna?
Sorry, just on the last point about what's included in that, I was looking at my notes. I want to make sure I understood. So one single family dwelling on a lot
Would not be
doesn't apply. But if there's several single family dwelling lots that were being, as part of a development, that would apply.
Yes, because those are typically your optional method development projects.
And then you said under 2502, if there was something like a series of duplexes, that would trigger it as well?
It would not, because in this table in the key, we have optional method cluster development and then optional method MPDU development. 2502 created a new type, which was the optional method workforce housing development. So that would not be in here. I will add that ZTA did have like setback and impervious surface requirements. So they generally, the way the standards were drafted, would have as much, I guess, green space as a single family home would, but they wouldn't trigger needing a landscaping plan.
Got it. And if a home that was subject to it right now is sold to someone else who wants to plant something else, how does that work?
It would not trigger needing a new landscaping plan.
Got it. That's what I thought. Okay. What about things like landscaping done by private businesses around their business?
So it would depend if they are doing enough of a change to their property that they need to go to planning board to get a new approval, or if they were doing, let's say, there might be instances
If they
where a
expand their
major enough
footprint or
amendment.
something? Or,
Yes. So
Okay.
if planning board determined based on what they're changing, they need a new landscaping plan, then it would be triggered. But if, let's say, your local Walgreens wanted to change the bushes out front of their house, then it would not apply.
And it's advisory to any publicly owned properties like MCPS or parks or anything else?
Yep.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
So there
And clarify, because you said it earlier, even if it's not a new property owner, an existing property owner, once the new property is approved through the new property approval process, the landscaping plan, et cetera, every aspect of it, the next day they could change it. It doesn't have to be a new owner, just to clarify. Is that correct? 'Cause that's
Yes, there's a small caveat on the timing. So it depends when, basically DPS does a final inspection before everybody moves in. And so that is when it is checked. So yes, if the day after that, a week after that, then that's when it likely
but there's
wouldn't
no
apply, 'cause
requirement
DPS wouldn't go
after
back.
that final inspection.
Yes, there's no reinspection requirement, I should say.
Okay. Thanks.
So the 4 types of open space begin at the bottom of page 6. So we have our rural open space, that is for our rural areas. That is required for cluster development and for other optional method development. And that's land that's basically managed as farmland or in a natural space. Makes sense for our rural areas. And the rural open space already, it's 100% required to have native plants. The one that's most common for people to think of is our common open space. So that's an outdoor area for recreational use for residents and visitors. It does not include your private individual lot. So if you're doing a townhouse development, you would have, your green space in the middle, but it wouldn't necessarily be the strip of front yard like right in front of your townhouse. And common open space, as you can see in the table, is triggered by many different optional method development projects, and then standard method for townhouse and apartment as well. And then our commercial zones, because I don't want to forget about those. Public open space is our open space for public use. So that's more your public parts. It's broader than just the people who are living there. And then lastly, amenity open space is your outdoor area for recreational natural amenities. That's common in our employment and industrial zones. So again, the table breaks down. You start with the zone you're in, and then you figure out which open space you have to provide. Generally, I didn't do an exact breakdown to spare you more words to read, but different zones require different amounts of open space. So for example, in the rural residential zones, the rural open space requirement is 60%. But in a residential detached zone, for a common open space, it ranges from 15 to 20%. And that's just based on the way that our zones are designed. So those are all broken down for you on page 7 as well. And then lastly, on page 8, you will see what is in every type of open space. So it's, yes, open space is required. What does that mean? So for common open space, that includes lawns, gardens, but it also could include a pathway and the walkway. All of that is part of the open space, which will be relevant when we get to measuring later in this work session. So going back to the actual ZTA, that's your open space history lesson. So ZTA 2510 amends table 6.3a and makes native species required in all open space. A question that was asked here is what the ZTA does is it changes the word preferred to required. So I did check with planning. Preferred meant planning staff tried very hard to push applicants to provide as much native species as possible. But the idea here is now it says required, so it will be mandatory. And then lastly, as you might remember, the council passed 2505 in July, I believe. That's the incentive zoning. And there were actually incentive density given for pocket parks. Those are also types of open space, so this would apply to that as well. It would have to be that 50%. So that's the overview of where it all applies. And next is mandatory referral, so I'll skip that section.
Yeah, just the pocket park question. So how does this work in practice? So if you are required, if you have a pocket park that you're putting in, the purpose of the pocket park is for play, how does that coincide with native plants? How would that functionally work?
So it would have to be that 50% of the species that are put into that pocket park would have to be native species. I know we're going to talk later about how that's going to be measured, but let's say it was measured by area. 50% of the area of that pocket park would have to be native species.
And are there native species that can be used for like green play area, like a field? Like
Depends who you
for
ask.
A soccer field or, you know.
Yeah, so there are, actually it might be, it's the very next page. Thank you, Chair Friedson. So there are different types of native grass. It includes things like micro clover and moss. There's some grasses that look more meadow-like and are longer. So I guess the most objective answer would be like, yes, native grasses exist. Do they look the same as like a lawn or sod and play space currently that we picture? No.
Are there places that have used native grass requirements that are replacements for recreational green space?
That I'm not sure of, but I could look into it for the committee.
Got it. Okay. Councilmember Fani Gonzalez.
Just so we're all clear here, and this is me going back to the planning board. Well, people assume that when you say park, you're always thinking about open spaces. I remember receiving applications where the park was a basketball court, for example. So it's not necessarily grass. So just keep that in mind. That's all I wanted to raise here.
It's an important point, though, but the flip side of that in the context of this is if you had a green space requirement that you were doing and part of it is a pickleball court or a basketball court, the rest of it, the other 50%, would have to be something, and if it can't be a grass that is native, then you may have a situation where that couldn't be the green space, the recreational space that would be allowed. So it's just something that I'm trying to navigate through here. Is theoretically I understand it, but in practice, what does this mean for potential recreational opportunities when we're building an apartment complex, when we're building multifamily, when we're looking at the mandatory referral stuff that we're going to get to in a minute? I think it's helpful to understand. Councilmember Bachman.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I know that we're going to talk at length about sod, but this is for me, this is the critical point, the question 3. It's who will this ZTA most impact? And there's been a lot of confusion about the point, and thank you, Ms. Nadeau, for the confirmation. It does not apply to residential lawns regardless of how many single-family homes are being built, correct?
Correct.
So it just impacts the open space. And so the focus of the ZTA is future development. And so when we talk about residential development in the county, future residential development in the county, we're really talking primarily about townhomes and multifamily apartments. And that, for me and my district, is the area where we most need green space. Sure, we need the pickleball and we need the basketball courts, but we need green space. It is the only green space for kids to play. My community, I've mentioned many, many times, I live in a townhome community. There are 100 townhomes in one village green. We have a tot lot with some green. We've got some green spaces. But I just want to make sure that we know we're talking about the very limited green space available to people who live in townhomes and apartment buildings.
Important note. So residential subdivision, single-family homes, the lawns in front of the single-family homes would be allowed. The civic green would have to be native.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions about this particular item while we're on it? We can continue.
So next is the types of grass that are included. I provided some images. It's obviously not all-inclusive, but I thought a few of the different types of examples. Of course, I printed my staff report in black and white, but you have it in front of you on your screens. Something else to flag here, because it came up in public testimony, was a request to use a specific list. ZTA 2510 does not say it has to be from a specific list or database. It just says Mid-Atlantic region. There were no recommendations from other departments or agencies requesting a specific list. As noted, there are some requirements and the note of preferred for native plants. So the assumption here is that planning has been able to figure out what native species are. But I just flag that here because lists exist if the council wanted to use a specific list. Also, the reason for using the Mid-Atlantic region was to address some of the concerns about climate change. The idea being if you pick a broader region, then it's more likely that you have native species that, you know, as it gets hotter here, we can have those North Carolina plants would still count as native because they're native to the region itself. So flagging that as well. And then I will jump to page 12. This was a question about cultivars. So a cultivar is a plant that's created by humans through selective breeding. There were some questions about whether they should count as native because they are technically created by humans. Pros and cons on both sides. On the one hand, they might lower genetic diversity if they're clones, but on the other hand, they can be bred to increase wildlife values, so it could be good for insects, and they're also more available for sale, so it gives more options. The planning board recommends allowing the use of cultivars. And so, I know you're not taking up amendments. Oh.
We have to take a pause because apparently there's technical difficulties again, and we're not streaming. Okay, we're back, 2 o'clock sharp, and we are going to continue our conversation on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee on the first item of our agenda, our continuation of the conversation related to Zoning Text Amendment 2510. Ms. Nadeau.
So for those watching, we are on page 12, question number 6. Are cultivars included as native plants? So as noted, a cultivar is a plant created by humans through selective breeding. There are pros and cons, such as genetic diversity versus increasing wildlife value, because that science is involved, and having a wider variety. So the planning board recommends allowing the use of cultivars, and council staff agrees with that recommendation. So next, on page 13, how will 50% be measured? This is a question we received from both testimony in opposition and support. There were a lot of ideas here on how this could be measured. They included by the quantity of plants, by the number of species, by category. Planning board recommend by using 50% of the plant material. It could also be measured by area. So council staff has narrowed it down to 4 options for the committee to consider. The first would be option A, which is by area. So this would mean if you have 2,000 square feet of open space, 1,000 square feet must be native species. But keep in mind, you'll have to account for the fact that, as we noted earlier, open space does include like the paths and the walkways. So there might need to be some tweaking on whether those paths are included in or out of that requirement. Option B is by category. So this option gets you, I think, based on the testimony and support, the most native species on the site, because you would divide by every type of plant. So you would do 50% of perennials, which are flowers, 50% of grasses, 50% of trees, and then 50% of shrubs would have to be native. Option C goes to sort of the approval process. So when you have a landscaping plan, there is a list of all the plants that must be in the final project when DPS goes to check it. So under option C, half of that list would have to be native species. This does mean you could have some variety where, let's say, you only have one grass on that list, but like 30 different plants, even though the grass takes up more area. So there'd have to be, that's the balance with option C. We did receive some correspondence from landscapers noting that they prefer that option. Option D would be by mass or size. So this would account for a shrub versus flowers versus a tree. There would need to be a bit of thought working on how to measure this one. There are, when landscapers are doing landscaping plans, there is information on like trunk size, trunk height. So you'd sort of have to go down the list and see, like, are 3 bushes the same as 1 tree, the same as 500 square feet of lawn? So that would be the way to do a mass and size, but that's just making sure that under the area option, for example, you could say, all right, you'll do 50% of sod, let's say, and then have 50% of trees, and maybe for cost reasons, that doesn't make sense. So many different options there for the committee to consider. I can pause here, or if you want to just keep going to amendments at the end. Either way.
Any questions about these different options or about how this will be determined? I mean, I have some questions. This would be planning or DPS making these determinations?
It would be planning who makes the determination.
I just wanted to see what the response would be in the audience.
DPS would have to go check it and confirm.
Yeah, so the approval would be by planning, but ultimately DPS would have to go and for the landscape plan inspection.
Yes.
I'd just be interested to know how it would work in practice with DPS going out and confirming, based on the various options that we move forward.
Could I jump in, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
As DP, as I was going to say DPS, but as everyone assembles. So this point has raised, as Ms. Nadeau noted, some of the most amount of comments and questions. My office has received questions related to by volume, does every blade of grass count towards a 50%? The answer is no, because I think what Ms. Nadeau has settled on, and I'll note option A, which is what I would prefer, is simply 50% based on volume, and that's covered by native, that's by area. And so it is what you see. What you see is what you get, and that is what is planted in that point in time. And it is alluded to in other areas that things grow and some of that changes, but at the point of planting, it is 50% of that open space as in square footage or however else it would be measured.
Okay, so there would be an agreement that happens at planning that gets approved by planning that says this is the exact species that's going to be in this exact place. This is where the trees go, and this is where the grass grows, and this is where the flowers are. And then DPS would go out and check and confirm that that species of tree and that species of flower and that species of grass is in fact the species that was approved, and that is meeting with the 50% requirement based on the standard that we set forth? Is that?
And I will emphasize before they respond that council staff would strongly urge, no matter what you choose, that it clarifies at the point of installation, because that is when it's being checked, because we know that trees grow, as Councilmember Glass noted.
So maybe
let's start with let's go how this process is going to work. Let's start with planning of how the process would work there, and then we can turn it over to DPS for how you're going to go out and inspect and what it's going to be based off of and what can actually be implemented.
So for the record, Robert Cronenberg with the Planning Department. So when we get a site plan, and in some cases a subdivision plan that's submitted to us, we do have a landscape plan that's part of the required plan that gets approved by the board. Staff reviews it, and the site plan will show the location of the plant materials, and it has a plant schedule on it, which Ms. Nadeau alluded to in terms of how it's categorized. So you usually start off with overstory or it's canopy trees to understory trees, shrubs, grasses. I don't know the last time I've seen anything that showed sod or grass on it. It was always like perennial type grasses, maybe some herbaceous depending on the type of plant that came in. And that would show the size. It would show remarks about the type of tree or shrub that's going in and their spacing. What I would direct our staff to do is now we need another column in that plant schedule to say native, non-native, so that it makes it easier to track for us. And when that's approved by the planning board, then we turn it over to DPS for inspections. And I'll let Mr. Matazzi weigh in, but I know that they get a list from the group, the developer, the landscape contractor that's installing those plant materials to verify what's been installed per the site plan. So there's a checks and balances in terms of what's installed. And then they use the site plan list that's been approved by the board to do those inspections.
Thank you, Robert. You pretty much said what I was going to say. For the record, Ihsan Mutazzi, the Deputy Director with DPS. So there is nothing different in today. What we have to do as part of approval of a site plan, when it comes to us, it has a table, it has a schedule. It specifies the type of a species, the number of trees, bushes, whatever is approved by Park and Planning. We have a pre-construction meeting with the landscaper before they start installing these plants and bushes, whatever and like Robert saying, some of the stuff is easy. I mean, it's for us, it's new. So as long as it's specified on the plan, what kind of sod, what kind of trees, and what has to be planted, we ensure it's done in accordance to the approved plans. And we do a final inspection of it, release the bond, and that's it. Really, after that, we are not there to see if they keep up with it or they change anything. It's through complaint or something that's raised to our attention that we would go there.
And one thing that Mr. Matazzi just mentioned, we do require a site plan surety, a bond, for the plant material that's installed. And once they get to a certain point, because planting can be done in phases, they do get release of that bond as they go through the process, and that's based on their final inspection. We hold the bond with the developer or the builder, and we'll release it once they have completed a certain portion of it.
So depending on the time of the year, we do a final inspection, and usually you want to have at least 1 year to ensure the plants and everything has survived. So we hold on to 50% of the bond for 1 year. We do another inspection. If anything has died or has changed, we make them to replace it. And once it's done, we release the remaining bond, which is 50%.
So the final inspection is a year after? Generally?
There is one final, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So there is a final inspection when the initial planting, everything is completed. Based on that,
and then there's a final inspection?
There is a final, well, then there is a reinspection for the release of the remaining bond amount. So really at that time, we release 50% of the bond, and we hold it for 1 year. That in case some trees dies or there is any damages, we come back and do another inspection after 1 year. If there are any damages, any trees needs to be replaced, they're done, and then we release the rest of the bond. That's the process. It is with the landscaping, with the trees in the public right-of-way we do. The same process with the certified site plan. It's approved by the planning board.
Got it. So up to this point, that's been based on if the plants survive. In this case, it would be if the plants survive or if they're no longer native?
It depends on what they were planted. So we replace in kind.
Because, I mean, earlier it was mentioned it's at the time of planting, but what happens if between the first final inspection and the final inspection, the re-inspection, there's been a change? Is it, as long as it was planted properly and it's not dead, then it still qualifies, or how would that be handled?
So It's still, because this is still part of that certified site plan. So if they change anything that was not shown on the certified site plan, they have to replace that and put what was approved on the site plan.
So that's assuming that they changed it. What
If
happens
they changed it.
If life changed it? What happens if the growth changed it?
Well, it could be damages and all that. Again, they're responsible. They're responsible to replace that damage, whatever it is, in kind.
But you understand, I'm trying to reconcile two different things here. On one hand, if you plant something and then something dies, then you have not met the requirement, that it survived a minimum of a year. And so you have to replant it, and you have to pay to replant it, and you don't get your bond back until you've done that. In this case, we're setting a standard that says at the time of planting, this is the native plant requirement, whatever we end up setting at that. There is a good chance, because things change, that's the only guarantee that we have in life is that things change, right? Is that reinspection going to look at the native plant requirement vis-a-vis the plan, or is it only going to look at the survival rate of the plants and whether or not it appears that you've done any any change? I'm asking questions of the department, and then if you want to speak, we can turn to you after.
So when we do the reinspection, we are looking at the entire thing. So if anything besides what has been damaged, if we see anything has changed because of if somebody changed it or it was due to the nature, they have to replace it in kind.
So then it wouldn't be at time of planting.
Well, it would be. Are you saying at time of planting the trees or that species was not available?
We haven't said anything yet. We're going through the legislative process here. I'm trying to raise the discrepancy between what was suggested earlier of clarifying at time of planting versus how the actual inspections and plan approvals happen, which is different. So if we're saying at time of planting, but we're also saying there's a reinspection a year after the final inspection, and at reinspection you are held to the exact same standards as you would have been at final inspection. If anything has changed, then you have to put it back to what it was. Then if the 50% ratio has changed in that year, which is inevitable if it was close to 50%, then you'd have to go back and change it, and you could be in a perpetual cycle of never getting out of the reinspection, it would seem.
If I may. So when the plan's approved, they'll install the plans per the approved plant schedule. And they'll get their final inspection for the building permit part of it. If plants die within that year period, they need to replace those plants according to what the plant schedule showed. So that would still maintain that native versus non-native.
Regardless of whether it's native or not, that's the standard.
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah, the issue becomes if that is the only standard by which the reinspection is happening, that's not what was said earlier, or if it is you're held to the same standard of the plan. If you're held to the same standard of the plan and we've added an additional standard, the native plant species ratio of some sort, and figuring out exactly what that is going to be based off of, that could change, even if nothing dies. And so the question becomes, how is DPS going to handle that? It sounded like earlier you were suggesting DPS would require you to be fulfilling what was approved the previous year in the landscaping plan. And if that's the case, and if the native species has gone below 50%, even based on natural growth, then you'd have to add more native species, it would sound like, or you'd have to pull up your non-native species in order to make the ratio work, or figure out a way to go back to what your original landscaping plan was.
So that would be the plan, but of course, if there is any changes that they're not meeting the 50%, that's when we have the conversation with Park and Planning. If they need to amend, this happens today, if they need to amend something, they go back to Planning Board and amend the site plan, come back and put it in accordance to whatever has been changed.
But how do you amend the site plan if the 50% ratio is not met, or whatever standard we use to meet that.
I'm sorry,
50%.
maybe, I think when I said 50%, I was talking about the 50% of the bond amount. I was not talking about the type of, I think that's where maybe I misspoken. I apologize for that. So we look at the landscaping plans and what is the schedule, make sure everything is installed in accordance to the approved landscaping plan. Based on that, we release 50% of the bond amount. That's it. When we come back again in 1 year, we'll look at it. If the type of tree or something that was planted a year ago now has died, it has to be replaced in kind. So the 50, everything should be the same. There is no change. This is just a reinspection to make sure.
So you're looking at the species when you reinspect. You're not.
Correct.
You're looking at whether or not it's dead or alive.
Exactly.
You're not looking at. You're not re-inspecting the percentages or the amounts or anything like that.
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Councilor Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the series of questions and the follow-ups, because what you've honed in on is how the process currently operates. And what is being proposed doesn't change any of the current process at all with regard to the site plan and the requirements that are already being made of property owners when they are doing any types of installation, gardening installation. Mr. Cronenberg, the phrase that you had used was gardening, I think, but it wasn't gardening. Plant material, I think that's what you had used. So any installation of plant material, and I appreciate the questions that you would ask, because inevitably, currently, plants die, things change, inspections are made, corrections are done, and picking up on the 50%, my follow-up to your questions would be, if any of the plants, if any of the native plants died within that year, my assumption would be that you, upon inspection, would ask them to replant that which died to restore it to the original site plan.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, as long as the calculation isn't redone, which originally, as it was framed, that was the suggestion, but you've clarified that that's not what you would intend to do, which was the main point of the line of questioning, which I appreciate you clarifying. Thanks. Councilman Malcolm.
Yes, thank you. I do think we do need to clarify at what point the owner can proactively change the plants. It's not at the point of final inspection. Or is it? Is it the point of final inspection? So if the inspection is done, it's approved, the DPS holds the bond, 50% of the bond for a year out, can the owner make any changes, proactively make any changes before the bond is released a year later?
No.
Okay. So I think that when we look at what point this goes into effect, it would be at the point that the bond is released.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think to clarify my prior clarification, I guess, is it's a little circular in that they have to stick to what was required at the time of planting, which maybe the more accurate phrase is at the time of site plan approval. And then reinspection is still using what was required at the time of planting. Maybe we will not use that phrase in any proposed amendments and just say based on what was in the final approved landscaping plan. And that is what must be there in order to get the bond back. And then after that, DPS is not checking again, barring complaints.
And may I just add maybe some clarity to that? So the majority of our landscape plans do not show planting on private properties. So not on the rear yards. On the front yards they might, but usually that's part of a streetscape plan. But so if a change has happened, it's being changed by a developer or the builder of that property, not typically by the homeowner, because that would not be shown on the landscape plan in most cases. In some cases, for larger lots, we've seen that happen before, but in most cases it's not.
Okay, important point on that. It was a little different than what was shared earlier, so I think clarifying that is important. Speaking of the last point, Mr. Cronenberg, when we're talking about the landscaping plan specifically, I think it's important that we just be very clear, and Councilmember Balcom earlier was talking about this, but I think very clear of what we're talking about within a broader plan approval at the planning board, and then how many plans, like what percentage roughly of plans before the planning board have landscaping plans?
Thank you for the question. So I'd say 99% of the applications that we receive do have a landscape plan of some kind. So for a townhouse or a single-family detached type of community, we're going to see a landscape plan that's going to show street trees, landscaping, whether that's shrubs, grasses, trees within an open space area, or around a tot lot that might be a visual buffer from adjoining residences. Sometimes screening, any kind of buffer planting that might be associated with a detached or an attached type of plan that's coming in, meaning townhomes or singles. For multifamily development, we would see landscape plans that would show landscaping in many cases in their public space that could be out front of their building. Streetscape could be primarily trees within that streetscape area. And in many respects for multifamily developments, their rooftops have some type of landscape plan that's associated with that. And that's more of their amenity space area. For commercial properties, we'll see it for parking lots, for buffers, and that's where you're going to see more shade trees and shrubs associated with their developments. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Yep. Any other questions on this? All right, let's continue.
Okay, so next is the question about sod. So how will this impact sod and turf growers? As noted in the public testimony, we received several letters from the farming and agricultural and landscaping community to sort of clarify different terms here. So sod is that pre-grown grass that's harvested in rolls, and then turf is something separate. That's our man-made, like synthetic grass alternative. To make it a little more confusing, there's also turf grass seed, which is a perennial seed. But the overarching theme here is that none of those are native species. So currently what is being grown on our sod farms would not be allowed as part of the 50% of native species requirement. As noted, or as alluded to by the chair, so our turf and sod is what's usually used for our recreational spaces, for our public facilities. Important to note here, it's also sometimes required in our master plans with other specific standards, so there'd have to be some thought to how we would make sure that moving forward, that you'd have these native species but still be consistent with language in our existing master plans. And I will pause after this, but we have a proposed amendment from Councilmembers Balcom and Lukey that would exempt sod from the calculation. So you would subtract the sod, and then everything left, you would use 50% would have to be native. And I will pause there because I know there's questions on this one.
Great. Well, I'm happy to turn it over to the authors. Councilmember Balcom.
Sure. And so I alluded to this earlier in terms of why this is so impactful. It's the townhome communities and the multifamily communities. With all due respect to our sod producers, thank you for being here. And I understand their economic point, but for me, this is an equity issue. When we look at that green space in these the landscaping plans for townhomes, single families, it is the only green space available for kids. I have a village green in front of my townhouse, and not a day goes by that there aren't kids playing on that green. And they're playing soccer, they're playing football, they're rolling around in the grass. And I read the RESJ statement, but they didn't take into account who who this CTA is going to impact the most, and it's people who live in townhomes and multifamily homes. So I don't think that we should include sod here, because we're essentially saying that these communities will have 50% of the recreational green space. We don't have native sod. We don't have native grasses that we all know to play on. And it doesn't affect single-family lawns. So all the single-family homes that are being developed in the future get their front yards and their backyards and their lawns. And so we're treating different sets of people differently, and one gets a lawn and the other one doesn't. One gets recreational, personal, private recreational space, and the others don't. And so I know that you're not looking at votes right now, but I strongly, strongly propose that this CTA does not go forward, including sod.
Thank you, Councilmember Balcom. Or Councilmember Lukey. Thank you, Councilmember Balcom. Councilmember Lukey.
I am the other one, yes. And I concur completely with my colleague. And I wanted to note, like when I was thinking about this and how we're classifying what is native these days versus what is not, and what grows here and grows well versus what doesn't. And I note that all of the photos in the packet of the quote unquote native to Maryland, Virginia things are things that are growing in a shaded area, right? And what grows in a shaded area is very different than what grows in an open green space. And we have wild temperature fluctuations and variations. But the types of grasses that we think of on those rolls of sod are hardy and withstand that type of wild weather fluctuation here that we experience in the Mid-Atlantic. So although they didn't start here and they weren't originally grown here, they've become part of our natural landscape. And aside from the reduction of available open green space for kids to play on, for people to recreate on, I mean, even in our commercial spaces, I was just up the road at a shopping center last week where I stopped in the coffee shop to get a coffee to go, but there was a gentleman sitting on the green space in the middle of of all the shops there with a blanket reading a book, right? You can't do that in the middle of, things like milkweed and butterfly weed and stuff like that. You're not going to sit in the middle of that. It just functions differently. The fact that this doesn't apply to our own county stuff, but we're making it apply to these multifamily developments and to our townhouse communities, again, separate, even apart from our single family homes and them being exempted, just doesn't sit well. And so that's why I supported the amendment with Councilmember Balcom, because I do think it's great to use native plants whenever we can, and I certainly do, but I don't think we should do so at the expense of usable open green space that provides other value and recreation to our residents.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from colleagues? Councilmember Glass.
I appreciate the thoughtful amendment and clearly the rationale behind it, and appreciate multiple meetings with the sod farmers and growers in the community and the county. I just want to probe a little bit more the difference between just laid sod and recreational space, because I still think there might be room in between. That might be space for recreation and play and open space for families, and then just sod to get around the ZTA's intent in total. And I think that's where a gray area is. And so I absolutely agree and I'm not on the committee, but would support the thought process behind preserving play space, open space, which is different than the way open space is defined, particularly within this ETA. I don't know how we square that circle, right? But there is a difference between providing open space that is not counted towards the 50% and then just letting the ZTA become unnecessary by laying sod everywhere.
Okay, so is there a proposal or a question? Why don't we turn it back to Councilwoman Balcom?
So I guess, I think I understand what you mean in terms of there, right now in the code, there isn't a separate definition of common recreational open space. There's
recreation's
not,
the key.
right, there's not a separate definition. But when we look at the different zones require different amount of open space on page 7, in townhome zones, common open space requirement is 15 to 20%, meaning there is a tiny amount of land dedicated to any kind of open space. And if we start chopping that up, it's going to be less and less and less. So we have these wonderful green spaces. Many communities don't even have that, but we have these wonderful open spaces with grass, sod. But then we also have the dog walking paths and the green space next to the tot lot. And so I don't know how we would define what a recreational open space would be. I think that's what you're looking at.
That's right.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fonda Gonzalez.
Based from what I'm hearing, and I'm very sympathetic with the comments from Councilmember Balcom and Lutke, especially on the racial equity issue that you mentioned, I don't think this is ready for prime time. I don't think that we're ready to vote, and I think we need more time, personally.
Okay, Vice President Joando, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the points. You know, we heard from another group, the builders, just over the weekend, I guess, or Friday. Appreciate our folks being here. Were you going to say something, Mr. Du?
I was going to confirm that, yes, we heard from MBIA over the weekend.
And then on this point in particular, yeah, I was just actually reminiscing, you know, for most of my childhood, I played on concrete. And my knees show it. But yeah, and so I'm sensitive to that. It would be great if there could be a, you know, I know we don't have it before us, but some sort of exception, you know, to think about. If there's something that could be in the middle, as opposed to, you know, just what you did with the sod is just say no sod. But I think that could be that could be broader than maybe we want if that's the primary concern. So, but I also you need to step back, and I want to think more about the whole thing. I did want to ask, just planning, if they had any view on the earlier question of the limitation of, you know, the A, B, C, D options. If there was any view from planning on how to calculate the 50%, and if you had any thoughts on this point as well.
Sure. Ben Berbert for the record, also with Montgomery Planning. The board itself, I think in its recommendation, wanted to quantify just number of plants, not necessarily species, because as Ms. Du pointed out in her packet, that could get gamed pretty easily. I think we had envisioned an idea where just the total number of plants, if that plant species list has 250 plants on it, then 125 of those plants would be native. I think after looking at this packet, we do like option B because it further kind of narrows down that you can't just plant 150 perennials and everything else is not native. I think we want to have diversity between levels. And so having option B, where sort of each category of that plant schedule has to show that 50% of the quantity of plants is native was how we envisioned it. You know, I think we're open to other ideas, but that's sort of our preference. And I think when it comes to the discussion on sort of sod or turf grass, I think we're probably in the same place. It sounds like everybody up here is. Our initial reaction is it's a lot easier not to count this in plantings, but I also think we're sympathetic to the idea that we don't want our open space to be 100% grass to get around any other requirements. And that sort of feels to me what might be missing is we don't really have, we have design requirements for open space, but it's basically setting dimensions and that sidewalks do or don't count, but it doesn't specify a certain percentage that has to be landscaped at different levels, and maybe that's something that's missing. I don't want to speak out of turn. We have to obviously figure this out, but I think maybe getting to a place where there's like a minimum planting guarantee that then maybe makes removing the rest of the sod from being counted might be a good compromise, but we really need to figure this out, obviously.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we fleshed out some of this. It sounds like there's a lot more information that needs to be fleshed out. I'm very sympathetic to the question of players. I live in a small multifamily unit. It's separated two buildings, multifamily low-rise buildings separated by a surface parking lot. The only green space where I live is the park. That's, and you walk to it and there's no direct access to it, actually. If at some point there is redevelopment as part of the master plan, there could be a pedestrian connection to that park from my community, and ideally, that will be an option for somebody at some point. Maybe not in my lifetime, or at least in my living experience, but hopefully some would benefit from that. But this is a real issue in terms of who has access to open green space, recreational space, and who doesn't, and who is held to the standard and who isn't. I think we all are supportive of the environmental benefits of native plants, but there are real impacts. We have to think through and navigate through it. Seems there's concern that if the 50% went through, that would undermine the intent of the zoning text amendment. That's what I heard from the sponsor. So if there is another option for us to think through and consider, I'd be open to it. But I'm certainly supportive if there isn't of the 50% if we are going to move forward here. But I think having some time to figure it out, as I heard, and have some recommendations and thoughts on it, I think would be helpful. But
If I could just add maybe a closing thought on this particular item. Clearly, you're hearing us all in real time understand the complexity of it. And I do think it hinges on the use of the term recreation and unprogrammed space, as Councilmember Balcom was noting. Grass can be unprogrammed recreational space. There are other uses of sod where it's more programmed, right? And so I don't know if there's other places in the code or other places within planning's purview, but perhaps we take a look at what else is there to figure out how to fine-tune this.
Okay, so figuring out what programmed or recreational space would mean in the context of a landscape plan, and giving some thought to that, both on the landscape plan approval and on the DPS inspection and re-inspection, the final inspection, as it has become to be known, because apparently the final inspection is not in fact the final inspection. It is the exactly. So it's the penultimate final inspection, not to be mistaken with the final inspection. Okay. Any other items on this discussion points that we need to raise for the committee's attention?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Any other comments from colleagues? Councilmember Balcom.
Yes, I do want to just the comment about native plants and what just the definition of a native plant and what that entails. And I think that when several landscapers brought up the point about two things. One is that native trees don't necessarily work best in parking lot commercial situations or don't really work best in median strips. And so I think that that's a critical point that we need to think about. What was native, what was considered native, evolved and maybe didn't evolve to live in a parking lot. So I think that's a critical point about the difference between suburban and commercial areas. And then also the question of whether the supply of native plants, that was something that was brought up. And do we have if once this change is made, are we going to be scrambling for, will the market catch up with whether we have enough native plants? I think that in this particular situation, I will listen to the landscapers. They know best. They're the ones that purchase these plants every day. And I think that we need more information on what is available and what's out there. So, thank you.
Great. Important points. A lot to think through, follow up on. So we will continue the conversation and see where it takes us and if there is a way to land the plane. With that, I don't see any other colleagues interested in commenting or speaking. So appreciate it. Thank you to our farmers and ag community who have joined us. Thank you to DPS and to planning. Thank you to Ms. Nadeau for navigating through this, who, in addition to cremation and funeral services, is now an expert in native plants, whose names I can't personally pronounce, but that we very much appreciate that. So we're going to move on from this item. We're going to move on to our next item with appreciation to the colleagues who joined us for this conversation. We have a colleague who's going to stay, Councilmember Lutke, for her zoning text amendment 2511, telecommunications towers. This was introduced on July 22nd, had a public hearing on September 16th, and I will gladly turn it over to her to share some information on it.
Sure, thank you. And I too want to thank Ms. Nadeau and our folks at DPS for working collaboratively on this ZTA with us. This was, the whole intent of this was to solve a very practical problem that we have encountered already here in the county. And I want to be very clear, because some of the testimony at the public hearing was about things that aren't in this bill, or things that are not in this ETA. So this is not about new uses and new authorizations of cell towers. This is simply a mechanism by which to deal with our cell tower placement during times of underlying repairs to the structures that they are sited on. You're probably far better suited to go through all of the legal stuff, because I am not a zoning law guru like you are. So I will let you go ahead with that. And there are some noted amendments that were suggested in the packet that I, of course, agree with. So
before turning it over to Ms. Nadeau, I just wanted to invite up DPS to join us. Would love just to provide an overview of kind of how we got here, because I think this is an important context of, what's the problem we're attempting to solve. Because I know DPS is involved in some of those conversations. So I think it's helpful context before we get into the meat of the issue, to have them join us to share that. And then we'll turn it over to Ms. Nadeau to walk us through the packet and the items, but would love to hear from DPS of, what is the current situation that we're in, and what is this attempting to solve, and then any feedback or perspectives that DPS has on this.
Okay, there is no final inspection involved with this, so. Good afternoon. Yeah, final and then a inspection. So good afternoon, everyone. Ihsan Mutazili, Deputy Director with DPS. As you see, it's an issue as has come up before. And I think it's really the way the telecommunication process is, it's done pretty well in DPS, going through the Tower Committee and in conjunction with DPS going through us to obtain the zoning approval and the building permits. Unfortunately, there are certain times that some of these cell people or providers are required for whatever reason. We had a case that, they had to move the antennas. There was like, AT&T, Verizon that was attached to a structure. I'm not going to mention any name, and they had to be relocated for the repair and maintenance. Unfortunately, something like that, you have to. It takes. The process is long because you have to go through conditional process, public hearing, and everything. So, in case of some of these people, how important it is for people for their having access to Wi-Fi and everything else. Going through something like that, which would take, I'm not going to take a guess, but it takes a long time. It's something that they need to do, be able to also to do what they need to do, but also provide the service to the community. When it came to us, unfortunately, our hands were tied. You have to go through the process. If you have a bill such as this, the proposed ZTA, it will really make it simple. It really facilitate a fast track for these people to come in. And really, it's not a structure anymore. It's a telecommunication. It's on a wheel that they can move it. So really doesn't require any review from us. Anytime you have anything on a wheel, it really goes through Department of Motor Vehicles. They are pretty good. And they have really tough regulations when it gets to stuff like that, and with the antenna on top of them that they have to move around. So really, that's something I think it would help. It would help for in cases in situations that are really needed. It's not something that we are. We are saying, hey, go ahead and do it all the time. This is really in certain situation. When it comes up, this is really needed, and it has a fast track to get everybody to where they need to go.
Okay, so you're supportive. We'll see if you have any specifics on some of the amendments that we take up, because I'm particularly interested on the implementation side to be able to fulfill exactly what you just said. But it sounds to me that DPS and the executive are supportive. Executive branch. Correct. Yes. All right. Ms. Nadeau.
Okay, thank you. So starting with the public hearing, we had, as usual, testimony in opposition and in support. So testimony in support, including from our providers like Verizon and AT&T, emphasized the need for a more flexible and efficient process to deploy temporary infrastructure, noting that the current rules restrict the ability to move quickly. For example, emergencies, infrastructure repairs, and public events. Testimony in opposition raised concerns about lack of safeguards and opportunities for public input. The RESJ impact statement noted a minimal impact. It actually noted that this could marginally improve telecommunications access for residents of color during emergencies or infrastructure disruptions, but did note that the county, of course, does still have an issue with the digital divide. The climate assessment noted that there are unlikely no climate impacts because this is formalizing a process for a technology that already exists. And then the planning board supported the ZTA with a minor amendment that I will get to shortly. So going through sort of the details of the ZTA, as noted by our sponsor, Councilmember Lukey, it's pretty narrow. So it would be this temporary telecommunications facility is called it's a new term in the code because we had to create that in order to do a temporary process. It would be a limited use in all zones, and it would only be allowed for 180 days. But DPS would be allowed to improve extensions, but they cannot approve extensions that go longer than 2 years total. The facility must be removed at the cost of the owner within 48 hours of the end of that period. And if they still need a tower, then they need to go through that permanent process because then that's not temporary anymore. The TFCG, or the Transmission Facility Coordinating Group, also known as our Tower Committee, That review would be required, as well as a building permit for facilities that are over 80 feet in height. A building permit and tower committee review would not be required if the structure is less than 80 feet, is on wheels, and is erected for less than 30 days. 80 feet was chosen because that is the height of the tallest currently available wheelbase model, so that just covers all the facilities on wheels. As noted by our Deputy Director of DPS here, that structure in the zoning ordinance, I know you guys hear this a lot because I'm constantly telling you that to be a structure, it has to be permanently in the ground. So if I accidentally use the word structure, I don't mean the zoning ordinance definition of a structure. And that's why the building permit wasn't considered necessary, especially for the ones on wheels in all instances, because they're not permanently in the ground. The facility must be at least 100 feet from an abutting property line, but understanding that that could be pretty far depending where in the county you are. The tower committee can recommend a reduced setback, but only if it's required for the function of the facility. If there's this emergency, we have nowhere we can put it that would meet 100 feet, then the tower committee can recommend to DPS that be lowered and recommend that lower number. As you may know, our tower committee has many experts on cell towers and the distances needed for them to provide coverage. So unless approved due to an emergency that's declared by a government, so county, state, or federal, notification must be sent by mail to the municipality where the tower will be, as well as property owners and all the neighboring community associations within 300 feet. So while there isn't necessarily a hearing or a public comment period, there is notice. And then next, the facility can't be illuminated unless required by FCC and FAA. And it also, because sometimes they have generators, they have to, of course, stay within the noise ordinance. I did want to flag there is a waiver process in the noise chapter where if the benefits of the facility are outweighed by the benefits to the public, the applicant can request a waiver. But again, public notice is required for that, and it's a 10-day review process, so it's not just granted left and right. So what are the reasons that we keep talking about? So the reasons include frequency and modulation testing by the applicant, supplementing communications coverage because the prior facility became involuntarily non-operational because of an accident or a disaster, a substantial increase in the needs of the county due to an emergency. Again, that's the one that's an emergency officially declared by the county, state, or federal government. A substantial increase in the communication needs of the county due to a large conference or special event. The one we like to talk about is the Ag Fair. Substantial maintenance that's undertaken or caused by the county. So think of this one as our CIP projects. Also capital projects undertaken that require maintaining uninterrupted wireless coverage. Relocation from a building that's owned by an agency or utility company. So if that building is under repair, obviously the tower on top of it must be moved. So that would be another reason. And then lastly, unforeseen circumstances that DPS determines require temporary facilities. There are application requirements, except for the emergencies declared by the government, the idea there being that it's an emergency. And we unfortunately, at least, well, I was going to say we work 9 to 5, but that's not really true. And I will note, if the committee wanted to change that, the recommendation from staff would just be to say you should do a pretty short timeline, a pretty compressed review period. Council staff's not recommending that, just saying if the committee wanted to go in that direction. So there are questions. I know many of you might remember the last time we talked about towers here in this room a few years ago. There were a lot of FCC requirements, a lot of federal law, a lot of case law, and the council decided on a lot of different measures, including dimensions, a conditional use process, a lot of aesthetic standards, and you will see that ZTA 2511 does not have all of that. But the reason is, again, because these are temporary. They're not going to be there permanently, and so do not require needing those additional safeguards. And also, the ZTA doesn't change other parts of the code. We were asked about forest conservation. Unlikely to be triggered because, again, not permanently ground, so you're not disturbing ground. but all other parts of the code would always still apply, except for this building permit requirement. So there are two, I guess I'll pause here for questions. No?
Yes, turn to the sponsor for clarification.
Yeah, I just wanted you wanted to make clear why we included the provision that allows for the extensions up to 2 years, and that was specifically because some of our utility providers, the repairs that need to be done on the underlying structures can take 18 to 24 months. So that's why that specific time period was chosen. That's not the majority of things that may happen, but it is a thing that could happen, and we wanted to make sure we had a provision that could account for that all in one while we were cleaning this up and creating a narrow exception.
Thank you. Let's continue.
Yes, thank you. So two proposed amendments before you. The first is there is some feedback with the concern that there may be a loophole here in that you could have your tower up for 180 days, you get your extensions, you take it down for 1 day, and then you put another one up. A few caveats here. You'll notice it doesn't say council staff recommends. Council staff's just raising this issue for the committee to consider. On the one hand, the recommended language would be to say that you have to wait a minimum amount of time to pass before you could put another one in the exact same location. The concern here is you might want to think about whether there should be any additional caveats, because it could be that there's just a whole new different emergency in the exact location in less than that chosen time period. But I did want to raise that as something for the committee to consider. I did not provide a number of days, but the possible language is at the top of page 6.
Any thoughts, comments? Anything from the sponsor?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Let's continue.
And then lastly is a recommendation from the planning board. So as noted earlier, the building permit application was only required if it was less than 80 feet in height, on wheels, and erected for less than 30 days. There was a slight consistency issue here that for a building permit to be triggered, you should add the language if it's more than 30 days so that you've covered both ends of the time period, and that language is on page 6 for you. Council staff agrees with planning board, as does our lead sponsor.
Okay. Do we want to dispose of that one? Let's just dispose of that one. So without objection, we will take that amendment because I don't think that requires any further discussion. Okay. I think that's all when it comes to the packet. I think there might be some broader questions. So let me open it up to that, and then we can go back for specific discussion and decision points. Vice President Joanna.
Thank you. So just, we received some testimony, and I guess I asked DPS on this, that the delays are caused by the applicants themselves. Any potential delays so I want to understand the timelines. What the need for, if you could just go back to, you kind of spoke to this at the beginning, what the need for this, or why you think this would be value add. One of the, is there, so if you could just speak to the broader need, do you see that this, it's an urgent need here to do this, and if so, why? Or if not, why not?
I mean, pretty much in the packet, what Ms. Lifu was alluding to, the certain reasons that you need a zoning text amendment such as this. For us, from the standpoint of, as I said, if somebody wants to go through one of these telecommunication application, they got to go through the tower committee, right. And they got to go through DPS, and then it depends on the type of telecommunication it is, the building permit that's associated with it. And also, I don't know if you have anything to add to it, because of it has to go through for conditional use. So I cannot tell you, to me, there is a need, absolutely, when you're talking about these providers, that they're going to be out or not being able to provide that service to the community. And in case of emergencies and other stuff that may come up.
There is some emergency power the executive currently has under the code, but it doesn't cover everything, right? That's listed
Correct.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, certain situation we had, it would not help with that.
And then, so the 180 days, and I think we spoke to this a little bit. Councilmember Lukey spoke to this a little bit. Why the temporary facilities would need to be for up to 180 days with extensions not to exceed 2 years, and just so what was the reasoning there again, of why it couldn't be a narrower amount of time?
The particular types of repairs that needed to be done on the underlying utility structure take 18 to 24 months. So that
Trying to capture
extended longer period applies in very specific circumstances with specific types of utility facilities where these towers may be located.
Got it. And then the height, the ZTA contemplates the height of the facility. How does that include antennas that are extended above the vertical support at the time of installation? Like, could you just talk a little bit about what the height?
Sure. So the definition of the temporary tower telecommunications facility, let me see if I can find it, apologize. Okay, yeah, so page 3, includes the monopole or the portable facility, and it specifically says the word facility. So the intent in drafting it is it's everything. Like everything on it is within that height limit. I know this question was raised because there are instances with the permanent towers where there's co-location and antennas being placed on top. But in this instance, it's that measurement should be for the entire facility and anything on it.
Got it. So to include anything, not
Yes.
from some other point.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. And you talked about the potential loophole, but there was another one that was raised. I just wanted that I've heard around areas that are where these facilities are not currently allowed in the county. Is there anything? Is there that this would allow these where they're not currently allowed? Is that? Could you speak to that? Is that a real thing here?
Yes and no. So our permanent towers are allowed in different zones under different circumstances.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, I thought you might remember that one. Through limited use, some are conditional use. Sometimes new towers aren't allowed in certain zones. The reason this is allowed as a limited use in every zone is because it can sometimes be covering those emergency situations that are, because it's an emergency declared by the county, or if it's a county fair, it might be an area where normally a tower is not allowed, but there's something happening in that area at a specific moment where it would be beneficial to have a temporary one.
Got it. And then that kind of connects to the point you brought up of you didn't suggest it, but you brought it up of the 180 days, take it down, put it right back up. And the language you said to get at that was the consecutive. What page? Where was that?
Page 6.
Okay.
Would
temporary.
say,
Is that E?
yes, that's E.
Okay.
So it would say a new facility may not be approved in the same location by the same applicant for insert time period after the approval period has ended. So that would close that loophole, but it would also mean there might be instances where let's say you picked a month and then 2 weeks later another emergency happened. You wouldn't be able to use that same spot anymore because whatever minimum time period you set wouldn't have expired yet. So it might limit some flexibility, even if it would close that loophole.
My colleagues are nodding and
Colleagues are
shaking. Yeah, I'm just trying to balance, the need for, the emergencies that the executive currently can use. It's more like weather and, what are I had it in here somewhere. What can the executive currently do under current law?
So under the current emergency powers, the executive can use or direct any and all facilities, equipment, buildings, and land belonging to the county, and any other equipment and property of the county for purposes for the welfare and benefit of the citizens of the county. And then it includes using equipment, facilities, buildings, and land that he's further authorized to purchase and hire additional equipment to carry out the purposes of this section. So it's pretty limited. It's something is happening and like the welfare of our citizens is in danger.
Right.
In those instances, yes, the executive can already do this, but that probably wouldn't cover
all of
like
these things,
a
yeah.
water tower being taken down or a county fair, for example.
Well, I appreciate it. I think I'm not going to suggest the amendment, but I just think it's important to kick the tires a little bit and talk about it. So thank you very much.
Appreciate you kicking those. I think it is an important issue. I think fleshing that out is helpful. So the executive's powers are limited. Are we currently executing those powers and we just need to expand them, or are they currently not being utilized even in the opportunities that currently exist? And so having this as an option would be preferred.
I am not aware of them recently being used for a telecommunications tower.
Now, let me ask this more specifically. Have the executive authority, as was just noted by Council Vice President Jawando, has that been executed over the last 7 years, or at least since the approval of the last zoning text amendment?
I would not know. I have no idea.
Not to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. And are there circumstances where it could have been used and hasn't?
Again, no comment.
I don't believe so, since it would have had to be a pretty noticeable emergency to use the emergency
Okay.
power.
I just think it's helpful to have the context of that, because those are two different dynamics. One is the emergency powers are so limited that there's still a problem. They never really can be used anyway. The other is we need more powers than that because it's too limited, but even within the times that it is needed, it's not being utilized. So it would be helpful just to get clarification on that. I don't think we needed to make a decision today because,
Yes, I can definitely confirm that.
but it would
answer
just
for
be
you.
helpful before we get to full council. Should we be able to dispose of this today to have that information? Perhaps we just included in the packet that it came up and here's the answer to the question. So appreciate it. Just to follow up on the line of questioning, which I think was helpful and good. So I think we have fleshed at least that piece out. Are there any other kind of overarching questions here? I mean, my only other question would be related to the height. The height standard as set forth in this, does DPS have a view? Is that an appropriate number? Does that accomplish what we're attempting to do? I mean,
Based on the knowledge that I have, I mean, at this time, really 80 and below should be able to accommodate. the
okay,
need
so we
out
think it accommodates what needs to be accommodated, but is
and more
within
for
reason.
other right,
Okay.
for other cases, yes.
Okay, so DPS has no issues with the height. Okay, I think that is helpful for us to have as information, since that has always been a big discussion point. What heights, when you're talking about certain communities, the idea of towering towers is something that has come up from time to time, and obviously these are temporary, but that is a sensitivity, and so having an understanding where DPS is on that, I think, is helpful. Great. Okay, do we want to go through the decision points that we have on this? We disposed of the one clear one. There were some questions, not necessarily formal suggestions.
You disposed of the
There's a question about number one
B.
that we did not take.
Right. Number one, you did not, which is where it says subsection letter E.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you took
Yeah,
the second
so that's
one
why I just
already.
wanted to go back and see if there were any other ones that are not included in the packet, if anybody else had. But so why don't we go back to one, which is E, and let's talk through that. And we have to brackets insert months. So we have to talk through what.
If the committee would like to make that amendment.
No, exactly. So I think the question, we just have to dispose of that. You asked about it, so dispose of that. So you're not proposing putting that forward? No. I don't see anybody proposing putting that forward. So then we can not have that discussion if there's no interest in that. I just wanted to make sure we were formally disposing of that. Okay. All right. Well, I think we have then disposed of all of the items in the packet. I don't think there's anything from the sponsor or from council staff or DPS on this. And any issues from planning? No issues from planning. Okay, great. With that, we have a zoning text amendment as amended before the committee. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. That is unanimous. We will forward this along with a favorable committee 3-0 recommendation to the full council with thanks to Councilmember Lukey for joining us and putting this forward. And thank you to DPS for your participation in the work of this zoning text amendment and in the discussion today, and to council staff and to planning and to everybody involved. Thank you so much. With that, colleagues, we are adjourned.